Words have value. Therefore, one of the main indicators of a strong leader is their capacity to persuade others of their goals and ideas, inspire them, and direct them toward a shared objective. Here are some illustrious presidential quotes from the past, ranging from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address to Ronald Reagan's "Tear Down This Wall" and Emmanuel Macron's 2018 speech at the U.S. Congress.
Presidents throughout history have influenced the populace and the country through their words.
There have only been a few occasions when the words said by the presidents over the previous 200 years have been exploited to their full potential.
Number 1. Abraham Lincoln's 1863 Gettysburg Address.
Following the Battle of Gettysburg, President Abraham Lincoln delivered a 2-minute address at a cemetery dedication for the Union War on November 19, 1983.
Lincoln delivered a brief speech on the new birth of freedom and wasn't even the event's keynote speaker. But it has since grown to be considered one of the most powerful and unforgettable in American history.
407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, Lincoln said in part. Number 2. Franklin D. Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech in 1941. The day after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and precipitated the United States' entry into World War II, on December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered a well-known speech to a joint session of Congress. The opening sentence is frequently the one that is most frequently quoted: yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Number 3. John F. Kennedy's 1961 inauguration address.
In 1961, during his first 14-minute address as Commander-in-Chief, President John F. Kennedy used a memorable phrase, "Ask not what your country can do for your country," to motivate both children and adults to engage in volunteer work and civic engagement.
The group Kennedy addressed was what he described as a new generation of Americans, born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage. Number 4.
John F. Kennedy's Space Effort Address.
Kennedy said, "We chose to undertake the other things in this decade, not because they are simple, but because they are difficult. Prior generations ensured that our nation saw the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first waves of nuclear power. And this generation does not plan to flounder in the wake of the new space age. Rather, we aspire to participate in it and lead it." We were in a new era of technology and space exploration, which is why it was significant. Americans were given the impression by President Kennedy that there was nothing they couldn't accomplish or a difficulty they couldn't overcome. Before Vietnam, Watergate, the passing of our heroes like Jack and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., and before any of these events, there was a time when they all believed that, if they worked together, they could achieve their loftiest aspirations.
Number 5.
The "We Shall Overcome" speech by Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. Civil rights activist John Lewis and more than 500 marchers were assaulted on March 7, 1965. 8 days later, President Lyndon B. Johnson spoke before a joint session of Congress to call for the adoption of legislation that would ensure everyone's access to the polls. Number 6.
The 1987 Tear Down This Wall address by Ronald Reagan.
In 1987, President Ronald Reagan visited Berlin, Germany to mark the city's 750th anniversary. At the time, the Berlin Wall had been severing the city in half for almost 26 years, acting as both a physical barrier and a powerful symbol of the divide between the communist Soviet bloc and the democratic capitalist bloc. The most well-known words of Reagan's presidency are perhaps those he spoke when standing barely 100 yards from the barrier during a speech. Number 7. George W. Bush's speech following the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
On the morning of the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks, President George W. Bush was in Florida visiting an elementary school.
He ultimately took Air Force One back to Washington, D.C., determined to get back to the White House, and delivered a detailed primetime speech from the Oval Office to a terrified nation.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, and our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts, Bush stated.
Evil, disgusting acts of terror abruptly terminated thousands of lives.
We were shocked by the images of aircraft crashing into buildings, fires raging, and enormous structures falling.
We also felt deep grief and a calm, uncompromising rage. The purpose of these mass murders was to send our country into an uproar and cause it to flee.
However, they fell short because our nation is robust, he added.
Number 8. Dwight Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace Address to the United Nations.
Eisenhower said, "I feel compelled to talk in a vocabulary that is in a way fresh today. One that I would have hoped to never use, having spent so much of my life in the military. The language of nuclear conflict is that new language."
The United States wants to project more than just might against the ominous backdrop of the atomic bomb. It also wants to convey a desire and hope for peace. The United States commits before you, and hence before the rest of the world, that it will do everything in its power to assist in resolving the terrifying nuclear problem. Number 9.
Ronald Reagan's remarks at D-Day's 40th anniversary ceremony.
Reagan said the Rangers glanced up and saw the enemy soldiers at the edge of the cliffs firing down at them and hurling grenades, and the American Rangers started to ascend. They launched rope ladders over the cliff's face and started to haul themselves up. A replacement Ranger would step in after one fell. A Ranger would grab another rope after cutting the first one, then start climbing once more. They ascended, fired back, and maintained their balance. The Rangers eventually pushed themselves over the top one by one, and by taking control of the hard soil at the top of these cliffs, they started to retake control of Europe.
You all understood that certain things are worth dying for veterans?
A person should die for their nation, and democracy is the most morally upright form of governance that has ever been created. Number 10.
Ronald Reagan's speech on the Challenger space shuttle disaster. Reagan said the bold, not the weak-hearted, will inherit the future. We were being pulled into the future by the Challenger crew, and we'll keep doing that.
By the way, they lived their lives. The Challenger crew of the space shuttle honored us.
As they said farewell and got ready for their journey this morning, slipping the shackles of earth to meet the face of God, we will never forget them or the last time we saw them.